Good evening. I am Karen Taylor, Program Director of the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen of the City of New York. And I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's lecture, which is part of the Artisan Lecture Series. The Artisan Lectures are supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council. I would also like to express our appreciation to the New York Landmarks Conservancy, who helped promote tonight's talk, as well as to Katha Rambush for sharing her wonderful, rare book, A Description of Central Park, which was published in 1869 as the original introduction to Central Park. And if you have not seen this before the lecture, it will be on display for a short time after tonight's talk. And finally, our thanks to Thomas Donahue, who created a special window for tonight's lecture. And if you have an opportunity when you leave tonight, I do suggest you take a look. For those of you who are less familiar with the General Society, and if you don't mind, I'm going to ask, if this is your first visit to the General Society, could I trouble you to raise your hand? Okay? Okay, well, a warm welcome to you, and an equally warm welcome to those of you who are returning. We are a non-profit institution that was founded 234 years ago by the skilled tradesmen of New York City, and in particular, 22 artisans. Today, our organization continues to serve and improve the quality of life for the people of the City of New York through our educational and cultural programs. These include our John M. Mossman Law Museum, which you can see upstairs, our General Society Library, which will be celebrating 200 years next year, our tuition-free Mechanics Institute, and finally, our lecture series, which was originally founded in 1837. So we've been having wonderful speakers for quite a few years now. You will also find information about the General Society on your seat, and if you're interested in library membership, you will find that on the library desk. Tonight, we have the huge pleasure of welcoming Cynthia S. Brenwall, a conservator and art historian who has worked for the New York City Municipal Archives since 2012. During her tenure there, she has cared for some of New York's most important historical documents, including the conservation and documentation of the Central Park collection. Cynthia, of course, is here this evening to talk about her stunning book, and I don't know how many of you have had an opportunity to see it, but it is really just incredible. As Cynthia will outline, it's really been, an extensive work project, but it's just the images and the text, they are just fantastic. So we are so pleased and honored that Cynthia can be here tonight to talk about it. She has compiled, as I mentioned, most of the drawings from the New York City Municipal Archives and has written, of course, the accompanying narrative. And finally, just to remind you, this wonderful book, of course, will be for purchase this evening from Lindsay at Books on Call. It is now my huge pleasure to introduce to you Cynthia Brenwall.
Thank you, Karen, for the lovely welcome. And so wonderful to see so many people out here tonight interested in Central Park, and to hear a little bit of the story and tales that went into putting the book together, and see some amazing drawings of the original drawings of Central Park. So I did this project. It's not everyone that gets an opportunity to write a book for their job, particularly when you're a paper conservator. I work for the New York City Department of Records and Information Services, most directly related with the Municipal Archives. Our kind of presence, our public notice is to care for and collect records created for the New York City government. We have over 200,000 cubic feet of materials, ranging from photos to documents to mayoral papers to lovely things like the original drawings of Central Park. Anything that was created for the New York City government. I happen to work in the Surrogates building downtown at 31 Chambers Street. It's an absolutely stunning building from 1897 with an amazing marble staircase and mosaic tile ceilings. We have public research rooms as well as a reference room. You're welcome to come and join us for our open reading room as well as public programming. That being said, not everything is quite so glamorous at the archives. I actually work in the basement of that building. We have 3 storage facilities. Our main one is, again, at Chambers Street, but we also have large facilities in both Queens and Brooklyn. We're really excited that in 2021, we will have a new state-of-the-art facility opening at Industry City in Brooklyn. Part of what we do also to make our presence known in the world, we do have some outreach, which includes a website, digital galleries with over 1 million images. If you're looking for family records, you can find things like that. We also do a really amazing staff blog. I'm not saying that just because I've written for it, but it's a great chance to see the hidden secrets of the agency, things that our archivists have found that have become passions of their own. So they've done the research on their own time to make them available to the public, so you can see what kind of collection materials we have. So I work in the conservation lab. We do the care and preservation of all of our collections materials, things ranging from paper drawings to books, photographs, and objects. This is a bench scene from me working on one of the drawings, matching some toning, some paper. And we do get to work with some cool tools. That's one of my favorite parts of the job. We work as a team. This is my colleague and I. We're actually lining some beautiful atlases. So again, we get to work with amazing brushes and tools, and we put things, essentially this was putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. It was a map that was in 14 pieces, and we relined it, and this was the final outcome. And again, not everything is so beautiful or fun to work with. We do have, as any archive does, have some disasters and pesky situations. Kind of the evil enemy of all collections, of all archival collections, water, which turns into mold, including on a huge volume. Luckily, it doesn't look like it, but it was actually found quite early, so none of the book was actually damaged. In the center shows film corrosion. That we actually don't handle in-house, so we send that out to a team of conservators who are especially trained to work with nitrate. And finally, really the enemy of all archivists and conservators is tape. People trying to do their own conservation. This drawing had, when I actually finished taking all of the tape off, we estimated there was almost a mile of tape on it. And not just one kind of tape. It had 4 kinds of tape on it. In this one, you can see the stain of the oils from the backside are coming through. This is a beautiful drawing of the Brooklyn Borough Hall, which had furniture designed to go specifically in the building. It was probably a 2-week project to take care of 6 drawings. So how I started on the project, working with the drawings, which was kind of a dream come true. I was hired in 2012 to work on several small grant projects. And then later in the year, in 2012, we received a grant to do the conservation, digitization, and cataloging of our parks collection drawings. In 2010, about 125 drawings had been donated to the archives. We call them our fugitive drawings. They'd been away from the collection and were very happily brought back. So they came in all sorts of condition and types. So I, being trained in several different things, so I could also catalog things, I was brought in to do the conservation, as well as getting, as well as putting all these drawings back together. This is a drinking fountain for horses. As a 21st century gal, I had no idea what that meant. I looked at this drawing. It was one of the first that I worked on, and I assumed that the horse tucked its little head into the bowl and would drink out of that. So about 8 months later, as I was going through and cataloging drawings from our main collection of almost 1,700 drawings that relate to Central Park, our full collection of parks drawings is about 3,500, I came across this drawing. And I noticed the little bowls, which I can write in here. They looked really familiar. But I had to think back, like, where did I see those? How did I? And sure enough, I went back in the collection on the work that I had completed, and there they were. This was a drawing for the drinking fountain that had been in our main collection. The bowl previous was in this new collection that came in. So I was able, for the first time, to be the one to put the two drawings back together. And it was an exciting day, and telling the tale to my colleagues and what this was and how it worked was just a really magical moment. So in fact, this area down here is where the horses would drink from, and this area up here is actually for birds. So later, there's also a secondary design. Jacob Reimold did design gasoliers to be attached to it, which is how the fountain looks now. You can see here the original photo without the spire attached. There were always monetary concerns. Nothing was inexpensive to make in Central Park. But it features Minton tiles around the band here, and again, the later lighting that was added. But to put those together and see that, and then go see it actually in the park, is just kind of an amazing experience. So one question I get asked often is how our collection came together. How is it that you have these original drawings from 1850s, and how do you have them, and how did you get to work on them? So putting the collection together is an interesting tale. Once the drawings were completed by our team of architects, led by Calvert Vaux and Jacob Reimold, but they did have a whole team of architects working for them, they were put into storage in a room in the Arsenal, which had long been the home of the architectural drafting rooms. So that's where they stayed. In the 1930s, sometime after Sarah Delano Roosevelt Park was built, it was a new park, and it had some outbuildings. It was determined that one of those buildings would be a lovely place to house these drawings. So they were taken en masse and put in this warehouse, per se, or a shed in the back of the park, and left to be. From my understanding is that occasionally people would come to reference the drawings when they were doing work in the park, but for the most part, they were left uncared for and kind of not necessarily forgotten, but unused, until Henry Hope Reed rediscovered them. He was named the curator of Central Park, and he went in and found them and essentially carried them out with the help of the Avery Library librarian, Columbia's Avery Library of Art and Architecture, and they saved them. Columbia was the first away from the Parks Department home for the drawings. So they were held there, cataloged, and the Frederick Law Olmstead Foundation did some early conservation work on the drawings. So they were the first start. They lived at Columbia. In 1983, the New York City Municipal Archives was officially founded and moved into our location at Chambers Street, which had all the important things like some temperature control and flat files and a home for them. So that's when they were finally moved to the archives. Later, we move up to the 1990s, and there became some news that we had these collections, and some lovely curator at the Museum of the City of New York said, I know something about that. And they went back in their collection and recognized that they had about 40 of the drawings, of our drawings, in their collection. They had been there since they were loaned in 1932 to an exhibit in the museum. And I mean, we were very happy that they housed them very well. They did some great conservation work on them. And then they were kind enough to recognize that they belonged to us, and they returned them to us. And some of these are really the most special in the collection. They were all the ones that were chosen to be exhibited. So, I'm sorry, here we have Gapstrow Bridge, which is based on Railroad Bridge. It's actually a stunning drawing. The one closest to me is an ombra for waiting passengers. There were 2 ombras at the south end of the park, and it's where you sat when your trolley was coming to pick you up. A lovely Victorian cast iron structure, one of which survives today. It's now at Hearn's Head on the west side of the park, over just below the lake. It's known as the Ladies' Pavilion. It's absolutely lovely. Here we have an example of what a tennis house would look like. The tennis house was to be located in the same place that the tennis courts are now on the Upper West Side. But this included gentlemen's parlors, a drinking room, and a smoking room. So all very important to lawn tennis. We had a whole series of bird cages, which I'll talk about a little further as we move along. And then there's a lovely collection here based, again, from the Museum of the City of New York that were based on music. Music was hugely important in the park throughout its history. There was a concert held the first summer that it was open in 1858. Jacob Reimold's famous music stands here were these elaborate collaborations of cast iron and multiple colors. But I love the fact that while he did the technical drawing up here, he did also create a winter covering because they wanted to make sure that it wouldn't be damaged while it was closed. And the other side, we have an unbuilt structure. This is actually a drawing. Frederick Law Olmstead was famous for not wanting anyone treading on the turf, meaning he didn't really want anyone to go to the park and walk on the grass. So he knew that he wanted music in the park. He felt that the park is an institution to elevate everyone, to give them culture, so he knew he wanted music. But he came up with an interesting idea that, in fact, instead of having a music stand where there would be crowds of 2,000 and 3,000 people going to concerts in the park, he thought, very interestingly, that a floating music stand on the lake would be the great solution. So what we have here is essentially the same pavilion that Mold had designed, but it would float out. This middle section actually lifts up. So this is the small orchestra, and you lift it up, there's seating for the full orchestra. And then the 2 globes on the side, this is where the venue would be when it was playing, so it could be heard all through the terrace and as you were walking around. And then over here, which I just love, is its parking spot. So that's where it would have been located should it not be playing. Unfortunately, this didn't fly and it never happened, but it was one of my favorite drawings. We also had, these drawings did come from the Museum of the City of New York, but they tie into how this early collection that was donated to us played a part in how we could see how things were, some unknown structures. So these are the drawings that we had in our collection for the Conservatory water. There was actually supposed to be a formal cast iron and glass conservatory over on the east side at about 62nd, I'm sorry. And this would have been the front of it on Fifth Avenue. This is the skating, what you might know as the sailboat pond. So these are the drawings for those. They're gorgeous. In the set of drawings that we received, that I said they came in all kinds of different condition. These were actually some of the more porous condition, but they are the only known drawings of what that structure was supposed to look like. So it gave us an opportunity. They were exceptionally fragile. They had a massive amount of mold damage. Literally, when you touch it with your finger, they'd almost disintegrate in your fingers. So we made the choice to do as least the little bit of treatment that we could. So you do still see the mold stains, but you can actually see what the formal structure was supposed to look like. I did a little blow up here. Over here is a fountain. And the staircase, and you can see the staircase in here, all the tiny details. Here's a side view of it. It was supposed to have a camellia garden. It was supposed to have a music venue downstairs, and it would have all tied into the formal aspect of what was going on the east side. So while never built, it was lovely that we now have a chance that we could actually see what the structure looked like. Before that, we only had the documentation of the Central Park kind of biographer, Clarence Cook, who was writing in the 1860s. He had seen the drawings and wrote about it there, but past that, it had never been seen. So finally, the crowning jewel of our collection arrived in 2015. This is the Greensward plan. This is Calvert Vaux and Frederick Law Olmstead's submission drawing, design of the park. It's what they submitted to win the contest. It had long been held at the Arsenal, home in its home in the park, but it was kind of notorious for hanging over a conference room table where they would have their morning breakfast. So they had monthly meetings, and the chafing dishes with the scrambled eggs sat right underneath it. Luckily, one of our colleagues at Parks decided that was not the best case and realized that it really should come to us as we had the perfect place to put it. We made a beautiful digital facsimile for them, so they do have a copy of it in the arsenal. But it was a really exciting day when it finally came to us. So now I come to, I'd worked on these drawings for a year and a half. I'd studied them. I talked about them. I could talk, people would come in and we did tours and I would talk about these drawings. And finally, our commissioner said, I think we need to do a book. I've never written a book. Wasn't in my life plan, but it was too good of an opportunity not to. But it is true that, in fact, writing a book is hard. A colleague of mine said that to me regularly. So as I started, my original thought was I knew these drawings as an archivist and a collector and seeing them, they'd already been processed, so I knew all the bridges together. I knew all the buildings together. I knew, different how the drainage worked, but all together as groups. Well, if you do that in a book, it's kind of boring. When you look at 34 bridges, one after another, there's not really a story to tell there. So I found this map. I actually knew of it quite early in my tenure there. It's a beautiful map, hand-drawn, about 8.5 feet long and about 3.5 feet wide. And it shows every single detail in the park around 1875. So it includes every named hill, every street, the location of the pergola versus Dip Rock Bridge and how far things were. And all this suddenly made so much more sense. Things that you couldn't get a sense of when you walked in the park, I could suddenly see what that distance might be and how it was going to go. So I kind of turned that into my muse map. And took out a can of push pins and some Post-it notes and labeled everything. Then I could really see where the bridge was in relation to the path and different things. So doing this really brought me closer to the park in a way that I could see how it might be interesting, which then led to the idea that the underpinnings, the building of the park, the drainage, the things you don't see or the everyday things that need to be in the park became kind of the genius of the plan, because they were hidden and showed this whole built environment. And then it became a walk around the park, starting in the south, working your way around, north, east, and then up to the terrace. So that was the general plan of how the book got kind of laid out. So these are our park makers. They all became my neighbors, my friends, my family, because I'd been so, this had become my life, working on this book. So obviously the most famous would be Frederick Law Olmstead, who is really the name that everyone thinks of when they think of Central Park. I'm here to kind of promote the other guys, Jacob Reimold and Calvert Vaux in particular, because they did the work on these drawings. Frederick Law Olmstead was brilliant and a leader of men, but he was not a trained architect. He had no formal training in that. Where Vaux and Mold were both British-trained architects. And the plan that Olmstead and Vaux worked together on, they couldn't have done it without each other. They had a shared view in what a park should be, the democratic notion that the park was for the people and that it was a place to have culture and mixing of classes and something that everyone needed in a time when people worked 6 days a week and might never be able to get out into the country. This was a place that they could come and have some nature in the city city, as well as those who couldn't afford to go away to come down and do their promenade and walk around and enjoy some country in the city. And here are my best friends, Calvert Vaux and Jacob Reimold, both amazing characters and brilliant in their own right. Calvert Vaux was all of 5'10" or 4'10", so he did have a little height complex, and that might have been why he offered to Frederick Law Olmstead after they won the contest to resign. He said, maybe you should do this on your own. He knew that he was going to be written out of history. He didn't have the personality that Olmstead did. Olmstead had been working for the park before the competition. So he was known and he was charismatic, and he was immediately made a board member. On the other side is Jacob Reimold, who was a notorious bohemian, known for his work with color and fantastic designs and arabesques and all these kind of lovely curlicues and high Victorian designs. So, as I said, there would be no park if there were no drainage. The underneath of the park and the underpinnings of the park really were the genius of how things could be designed. You couldn't have the built structures and the things that were around in the park if you did not do some kind of formal drainage. The lower half of the park was completely bogland next to Manhattan schist, the rocks that kind of jut out of the park today. One of the annual reports said that there were miasmic odors spewing from the south end of the park. So I imagine it was not a very nice place. Before they started clearing the land, there was a bone boiling plant, and there were factories and industry and people living in the park. So it was a place that needed to be completely redone from the bottom up. And they took no limit of time to design the drainage and do the drawings for them. I could not believe that that the drainage system in the park would be the most interesting part of my research. And it was really just fascinating, but partly because look at these drawings. It wasn't just a scratch or just a notation. They drew out each brick. Here is the drainage system for the Transverse roads, which had a special built underneath with a rounded road, which all makes sense. And I'm sure an engineer would say, of course that was, but this was the first time that they were doing this kind of roads in the city through the rocks. They're plowing through the rocks across the park. This drawing here I absolutely love because while these are all the bricks drawn, it has all these beautiful handwritten notations. Here, that little, what looks kind of like a smudge, is actually a fir tree with a small man standing by it. So there were just all of these details. Again, hard to see here, but up on top, I'm so sorry. Speeding ahead there. Up on top, this is on drafting paper here, and each of these little spots there are little hand-drawn rocks, and they're showing how that drainage pipe would fit into the rock that the rocks needed to be there for so sedimentation and drainage could go through. So there was also a really amazing notion about the lake. The lake needed to be, again, was all man-made and planned, as was the pond and all of the water system. But the lake had a hidden secret. It actually can be raised and lowered by 3 feet. So it was ice skating was wildly popular at the time in the 1850s. That and tennis were the two sports that could be played by both men and women. So you'd have huge crowds coming up to go ice skating. But it was determined that if the lake was 7 feet deep, if someone fell through, they might perish. So they did a series of sluice gates and weirs, and in the winter could lower the water to 4 feet, let the ice freeze over. What's really genius, they also had a fountain, several of them around, that stayed up above the ice. So every night they flooded the ice skating rink, so there was a fresh sheet of ice in the morning. So just all these little designs. And then when it went back up to 7 feet, it was perfect for boating. So in the summer, boats could go around the lake. If something was going to go in the park, it was going to be beautiful. there was a thoughtfulness to all of their designs. These are some designs for drinking fountains, this time for humans. The lovely shared drinking cup that is attached, those were in place and commonly used until about 1910 when they realized that that was really how cholera was being spread. But that actual fountain has an interesting history. All the fountains in the park were individually designed. This one, and several of them right along the mall, had a cistern underneath it that in the winter they would drop down a huge block of ice. So in the summer when the water came over it, you'd have this very unusual treat of chilled water arriving through your drinking fountain. The other one, closer to me, is actually this is both horse and human. The chains here are for the cups line into there, and that's where you would get your water. This was put out by the Animal Protection, ASPCA, yes, that's it. So down below is where you could have your horse drink here, and you could get your chained water cup there. They also designed things like bird cages, because every Victorian park needed bird cages. So they did a whole series of gilded bird cages. And while the cages are no longer there, the stands are. You can actually see them in the park today. They have huge flower bowls on them. And when you look at that drawing and go into the park near the mall, you will instantly recognize them. They're very distinctive. But I was lucky to find this historic image. Lest you think there weren't bird cages in the park, we actually have one here, along with one of the many designs. So the bird cage here, and a drinking fountain here. And the park designers and planners wanted things like bird cages in the park because they were educational. They were a chance to learn something, to learn about nature, to learn about, as music provided culture. So it was another way of a learning experience in the park. All of the bridges in the park were individually designed. No two are alike. And even having amazing design aspects to them, very often when you actually see any old photos of them, you realize that they were very much overplanted and often covered with vines. This is Gapstow Bridge. It does not look like the drawing any longer. This is what it looks like today. Slightly different. So this was kind of based on railroad design, railroad trestle design. And after about 13 years, they gave up on replacing the wooden tracks and decided to go ahead and do a low stone bridge. It doesn't quite have the same panache. These are some of my favorite of the bridge drawings. The top is one, Pine Bank Arch is one of the cast iron bridges. What I really love, not only the amazing design of the bridge itself, but I love the fact that in my research I found out that this bridge was cast at a foundry about 6 blocks away from where I work. So they were actually casting cast iron in Lower Manhattan, which I can only imagine being a very dirty thing, like lots of smoke and whatnot. But what they would do is then put them on a cart and take them up to the park and reassemble them in the park. And down below is Huddlestone Arch. It is the only bridge in the park that has nothing holding it together. It is entirely gravity-driven. They found the large stone on the side. Actually, all the rocks and stones, boulders were found in the park, collected and turned into this bridge. It's up in the north end of the park, sorry. But today, you can still drive your car over this bridge. Or you can sit under it and have your lunch and you take your chances. But I just thought that was just what a brilliant design, using almost the same technique as the Romans used, building a wooden structure underneath, placing everything around with a keystone in the middle. So there were also features, so you needed the utilitarian things like the bridges and the drainage, but there were also things for pleasure. This is the original Boathouse. Looks a little different than Low Boathouse today. It was an amazing wooden structure that had kind of this fanciful woodwork and a slate tile roof. You can see some of these are all park goers here, and they're out on their boats. This is actually a shot taken from the boathouse across to the terrace. So the terrace arcade in the back with the fountain, it's one of my favorite historical images that we used in the book. In 1862, Commissioner A.C. Gray donated a Venetian gondola, shipped it over, and they had no idea what to do with it. There's a quote saying essentially that they put 6 Yankees in a boat and told them to row. And it didn't go so well. Finally, they got someone kind of trained for it. But they also did a series of drawings of how they might replicate it. And this was their idea of what that might be. Unfortunately, the note on the side says that be sure not to use Plan B because it doesn't work very well. Belvedere Castle is an interesting feature, and I love talking about it because it's been, some parts of it have been newly restored. Belvedere Castle was a folly, so kind of a pleasure to take you something beautiful to look at in the distance and draw your eye across the lake. Views were very important to Olmstead and Vaux. So this, if you're standing at the terrace, you can look above and you'd see up through the plantings and whatnot. So it originally had several structures here. This is kind of the main thing here, and another separate castle there. This is what it looks like today after the restoration. We're very lucky that Central Park Conservancy takes care of the park the way they do, and they're a big user of our drawings. When they do any kind of architectural work in the park, they reference our drawings, so they know that they're getting the closest to what was originally done in the park. These, in fact, their most recent thing that opened this summer was the Pavilion. These are our drawings for it, including, I love this. This is actually the roof line, so an aerial view looking down. This was obviously done at a time before CAD. Someone actually knew exactly what that was going to look like by hand. And you can see these kind of jewel-like structures over in the ceiling. And then this year, this is what they did. Again, they used our drawings as reference points, and it's a new construction with the same roof line. And so throughout planning, Calvert Vaux was known for saying, nature first, second, and third, architecture after a while. What he meant was, well, I'll come back to this drawing, but was this. So the terrace and the terrace arcade and the mall were what he meant by architecture. Yes, there were beautiful designs throughout, and they took care in making things as intricately and elegantly as they could, but architecture, he was talking about the mall. This is a drawing that we have in our collection. It's actually for one of the side pieces as you walk down the terrace stairs, actually right here. So that was a depiction of winter. There were several themes going on in the terrace. The seasons was one of them. So there's lots of references to spring, summer, winter, and fall. When I was doing my photo research, I came across this lovely piece here because it shows that the marble and the sandstone and all the things that were going to be carved were put in place first as blanks. And then the artisans and the tradespeople came in and they did all the hand carving in situ. So they did them in the park. There was not a second chance for things because they were already there. This is also a great view because you can see the Angel of the Waters, the sculpture, in place. So the Terrace Arcade is a very special place. This, again, is a representative of the only known drawing for what we have, only known drawing that we have for what the terrace was supposed to look like. It was another of the drawings that came in very poor condition. I spent about 2 weeks working on this drawing by itself, just to get it to the state that it's in. And I was not aware that it was the only drawing while I was working on it, which was probably a good thing. But we also have the collection of the drawings that are the niches. So these are the panels that are on the side. They were actually intended to be done with marble and granite. So they would have been very colorful. Now they're in kind of a faded version of a trompe-l'oeil painted in the niches, but they were supposed to actually be carved stone. We also have several of the drawings of the tiles Again, they were just labeled as the tiles for the arcade, not putting it into plan of where that might be. But as I started working on the drawings, I realized that in these niches, there was a small spot there for a rondel, which was actually supposed to be Minton tiles placed into these carved panels of marble and granite. So it would have intended it to be really an explosion of color, which you don't see in the arcade now. But this is, in fact, before restoration. Again, the Conservancy took on the restoration of the arcade. It was in poor shape. The panels of tiles, which were individual, this is the first time tiles were used on a ceiling like this, or Minton tiles. They had all come down. They had all of the tiles replaced and opened it up. The first time I went up to visit it, after I'd worked on that drawing, I just burst out into tears because I could not believe that that drawing is exactly what is on those ceilings. So it's just a really special place. And I love this image because you can see the angel out through the archways. We also have drawings for many things that were not built, which also indicate an interesting part of the history of the park. This happens to be an unbuilt Paleozoic museum. There were supposed to be dinosaurs in Central Park. There was supposed to be a dinosaur museum on the west side. It was not in place or in lieu of the Natural History Museum. It was supposed to be its own entity. The history of paleontology is just kind of a burgeoning science. They really didn't know what things looked like. The first whole dinosaur set of skeleton was found in New Jersey. So it was kind of a dinosaur mania going on. So they had someone come and do some replications, and this is what they imagined dinosaurs would have looked like. This drawing was completely dirty. It was covered. You could see really no colors through it. So as I cleaned it, all of a sudden I see these jewel tones popping up, and it was just this amazing thing of what looked to be more like a aardvark and a dragon popping out of the drawing. But it was also supposed to have an aquarium, and the walls were going to be lined with aquariums. This was in 1870. Boss Tweed came into the picture and said, "I don't think we want so much education in the park, we want fun." And despite the fact that the foundation had been built and the dinosaur reconstructions were about halfway done, they nixed the plan and they sent some of their cronies in and smashed up the dinosaurs. But if you'd like to see the likenesses of them, you can go to England, because he also did the same reconstructions for Crystal Palace exhibition. We have a drawing of an unbuilt restaurant. This again was supposed to be on the east side. It had a dual driveway, and I love this drawing because it's hard to tell this far away, but it shows down to the detail of hanging flower baskets and all these really just tiny little elements. It was supposed to be the Grand Casino, not to replace the casino, which was an area reserved kind of for women, and there's a pergola and lots of flowers. This was supposed to be a fancy restaurant on the side of the park. But sadly, funding kind of around this time became hard to come by. We also have some unbuilt gates. The east side of the park complained constantly that there weren't enough ways to get into the park after they put the fence or the stone gate all the way around. So Jacob Reimold developed a series of plans, which in fact turned out to just be an opening. But I think these are quite beautiful and kind of show the restraint that he could do in his drawings, as well as his elaborate decorative work. Some of my favorite drawings are the things that are the smallest details within parks or within the park, things that you wouldn't think of. When they were designing the Natural History Museum, Jacob Reimold and Calvert Vaux also designed both the museums in the park. They look nothing like they did then. They were both brown brick structures, both the Met and the Natural History Museum. But this shows a spiral staircase that would have led up to a curator's room. And I just thought this lovely design for something so simple as that we still have today was really a wonderful testament to the work that they did. And this is a fireplace in the sheepfold. I was very lucky. A friend of mine is the general manager at Tavern on the Green, so she took me on a back scene tour, and I found this exact fireplace. And again, even to this day, after working with these drawings for almost 7 years, to go and see something that I've seen the drawing from in place is just really a special treat. I also love all of the aerial views. To me, again, this as not an architect, and I don't have that kind of spatial thinking, I just think they're really amazing. The top set is for a clock. This is the clock looking from the top down. So this drawing actually has an overleaf, a flap that we removed to do the work on. But on that, you could see the flower baskets on the side, and here they are from looking down. There was also a whole series of lighting structures that were supposed to be done, made for 59th Street that would have actually crossed the street. So they were these aerial hanging light fixtures. And this is a time we're not talking electricity, we're talking gas lines. So the gas came across and met in the middle, and this would have been the actual light bulb. But here on the bottom, we have, again, what it would look like looking down. And probably for me, most spectacularly, is this roof line from Mount St. Vincent. It was a hotel that was up in the north end of the park. It actually is one of the longest histories in the park. But to me, to have those different rises and curves and the geometric shapes and the colors was quite amazing. And then these are two of my last two drawings, are probably two of my favorite. I came across this. This drawing here is actually a design for the pins that they use to hold the mint and tile ceiling in the terrace. And someone was they were people. These were working drawings. They were drawings that were used both in the field and, passed around and worked on. And someone was amusing themselves one day. Is it a man in the moon? Is it a smiley face? I just imagine someone having, their morning coffee and doodling away on these drawings that we now think of as these precious works of art. And in fact, they really were just working drawings. We do have a few in the collection that have coffee stains on them as well. And this is actually, I like to have this be it's the last drawing in my book. I always end a presentation with this. It is the first drawing that I ever saw in the collection. It was in the separated collection that came to us, and I just saw it. I knew Olmstead and Vaux from my art history training and things, and you'd always hear, they thought of every detail, that there was nothing too small that couldn't be designed. Well, I think this is a classic example of that. It's a stanchion post, how you might cordon off an area, and the simplicity of this design is just stunning to me. The colors are as true today as they were when they were made. They used gouache to do these, and it actually, you can see how the spear would have extended into the ground. And it was also one of the very few drawings that we have that all three of our main designers signed. Frederick Law Olmstead signed the drawing as a commissioner. He was the president and treasurer of the board at the time. All of the drawings that came through that turned into something that went into the park had to be signed off by the board of commissioners. So he signed that in that capacity. And on the bottom, we have Calvert Vaux and Jacob Reimold with their normal stamps at the bottom of it. I just think it's just a kind of a quintessential, such an irrelevant thing that you would never think to save, and it turns out to be this beautiful drawing. So, yes. Yes. I think we have a few minutes for questions if anyone has anything. We're going to do.
Ladies and gentlemen, please wait for the microphone to be passed to you so we can record your question, and make sure to speak directly into it so everyone can hear.
Were there any drawings of the whispering bench?
One more time.
There's a whispering bench.
We do not have the drawings for that. That's the bench to Andrew Haswell Green, and was built after our original drawings in the collection.
First of all, that was a great presentation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful. I wanted to ask if when the New York Police Department converted the Jacob Reimold stables, did they use drawings from the archives? Were you in on that work?
The two main buildings that are on either side are in our original drawings. Those are the original buildings. If you're looking at the buildings looking south, the one that would be towards the west side has new lighting structures. The drawings are always available. That was before my tenure with the archives, but they're always available and they're referenced by architects all the time. Those buildings are really quite amazing, and the drawings that we have for them are wonderful. I should say all of the drawings are, for the most part, and I can't say all of them, but a large number of the drawings are available on our website in our photo gallery. So if you want to peruse the drawings a little more intimately, it's a great way to do that because you can really get close up on the drawings.
Hi, I've got your book already, and I love it. It's
Thank
beautiful.
you.
It really is. It's wonderful. And I am so glad that you did this because Jacob Reimold is one of my Central Park. He is my Central Park hero. He's fantastic, as you can tell.
Yeah.
My question about mold is, he did do some work in Prospect Park.
He did.
Do you have any documents in your you got a face. Yeah. So no documents in the archives?
Very few, just a few. Unfortunately, Prospect Park is actually my home park. I know Prospect Park much more intimately than I know Central Park. I know Central Park on the grand scale and through the drawings, but I know Prospect Park, I'm there all the time. So no, unfortunately, we have about 10 drawings total and none of the structures. Yeah.
So sad.
So, I think.
Oh, thank you. You certainly give a good talk.
Thank you.
So I'm wondering if you ever wear white gloves, and what would you do with a drawing that had Scotch tape on it?
We do not wear white gloves. If we're working on objects, that's kind of a conservation question. If we're working on objects, that's a different story. Then they might need special handling. But clean hands are actually better for paper-based objects, so washing our hands frequently. There's too much chance of snagging on the glove, or you just don't have that tactile feel. Scotch tape, it depends on how old it is, when it was made. There's so many different kinds of adhesives and things going on that it's hard to say. We use a very light hand. We ideally use heat, a heated metal tool. Sometimes it'll lift up. Sometimes it leaves the adhesive, and we use a special kind of eraser. And in the most disastrous case, then we have to use some chemicals. We really try and shy away from chemical use because it does change the structure of the paper. But it's arduous, and we don't like tape. So. Yeah.
Are there still drawings that you're missing from the original?
Many.
Do you have a sense of where they've gone to?
I think that they were, well, I think as a general notion, architects keep their work with them. I think a lot of them they weren't all these spectacular drawings. There's drawings that are like 4 lines on a little notation or just an outline of things. And I think they were working drawings. I estimate that we might have, I'm going to say 25%, maybe 35. For 1 year, Jacob Reimold was the architect in chief, and he listed all the drawings that we did, that they did in that single year. So I referenced back, and we have about 25% of them. So.
And one other question. The initial plans for the park, there were 2, the other one being along the East River. Yes. Are there any design plans for the East River side at all?
No, that never got to the planning phase. It was already decided. By the time they recognized that was just not going to be big enough, they'd moved up, and then no drawing plans were made until the competition in 1857. So.
I recently read that possibly Olmstead and Vaux went up in hot air balloons to get an aerial view. Is that at all true?
I have not heard that, but it would not surprise me at all. They used all kinds of methods for looking at the park before it went, because Olmstead was already working in the park before the competition. They would walk around at night. They certainly had a long distance to travel anytime they were doing something. So it really wouldn't surprise me. They were using photography at the very birth of photography to sightline different areas of the park, which were also included in the original submission plans.
Was there any conflict between the role of Olmstead as member of the commission and Olmstead as a designer architect?
That's an interesting question. I think that his role was much more that of the duties as the commissioner and working to get their Vaux and his views through. As I said, I think that he was a leader of men, and he could do that. And he didn't put pen to paper. He wasn't doing those kinds of designs. He was doing kind of the long view designs. We actually don't have any landscape plans whatsoever. There's one, but it was done for one of the bridges in the north end of the park. So it's an interesting thought. I hadn't really, because I think that role was so integrated from the beginning.
The Conservatory Gardens are probably my very favorite place in Central Park. You mentioned conservatories, but only south. What about the Conservatory Gardens? Do you have much information about that end of the park?
That's a really interesting part of the park. It actually has always dealt with plants and trees and things. It was originally in the Greensward plan planned as an arboretum. To have Native American plants in it. So again, it would have been a learning place, but it's also where they had their kind of plant workshops. So they had a potting garden and a potting shed, so they were growing their own things to be put in there. After that, by about 1880, they actually had a conservatory in there. Didn't last very long. Apparently it leaked like a sieve, so they had problems with that, but it was, again, as a learning thing. When they took that building down, there were actually probably 4 different structures there. Then in the 1930s, through the WPA program, that's when the current, the Conservatory Garden was put in and designed by a woman. So.
Are there actual drawings of the conservatories that were there?
Yes.
Are they in your book?
They're not. There's some images of them. There's some images of how they worked. So some of the underworkings of them. It wasn't the grand cast iron conservatory as was planned further south. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. From about 2000 to 2003, 4, 5, I worked at the Museum of the City of New York, partly conservator, partly 501c3 lawyer. Mm-hmm. We all had to pitch in, as one has to do in museums. So some of this is familiar to me. My question is, there were communities living in Central Park, Seneca Village,
yes,
in particular, and the misuse of eminent domain made sure that many African American families were really swept off the land without much compensation or any whatsoever. But there was a thriving community there. Mm-hmm. African Americans who came up from the South, German immigrants and Irish immigrants, mm-hmm, who made homes there. There were villages there, there were shops there, there were communities there. What happened to them? Do you address this? I'm not saying you should or shouldn't, but it's something I've made a bit of a study of, so I'm mm-hmm asking you your opinion.
Yeah. There certainly were. There were over 2,000 people living in the park, not just in Seneca Village, but throughout. They did use eminent domain to take the land. A vast part of the land was actually owned by the city. Some of the blocks and lots, which that land was already broken up into blocks and lots, did belong to the city or had no owners. But yes, they did use eminent domain. For the most part, People, and I know more of this through my colleague Sarah Cedar Miller, who's writing a history, a prehistory of the park. So we talk about these things quite often. So that the land was often owned by African American landowners that lived on the west side, and many of the people in Seneca Village itself were renting. So they did lose their property. They were moved off. Sarah has told me that from her research that many of them moved to another kind of African American based community down near 59th Street. Past that, it's a little outside my knowledge base. I know some of the interesting history for it, and I've certainly read a lot about it. But I think that it's an interesting topic, and there's a lot more research to do. Sarah's found some fascinating things that'll be coming out in her book next year.
Last question.
Hi, thank you so much. I didn't know anything about the bird cages in Central Park, and do you have any information? Were they well maintained? Were the birds fed every day? What happened in the winter? That sort of thing.
That might be a little past my knowledge, but I assume because they already had the menagerie in the park, they were already taking care of animals. It was a passion. From the inception of the park, people began dropping off animals. We have an amazing ledger that lists all the animals that came in, and if they stayed, if they lived, if they died, who brought them. People were dropping off penguins and giraffes and things. The Victorian homeowner had lots of interesting collections. So they were kept at the Arsenal. I know that the bird cages were all along the mall. My instinct is that yes, they were taken care of well, as I've seen the drawings and designs for things like the elephant house and different areas that they built specifically for the care of and tending of animals. So thank you all so much.
Yes. Thank you. Cynthia, your eloquence and your depth of knowledge, and I'm also thinking about your skill set, because I don't know how many other conservators, they may be art historians, but are they also writers? So you are a perfect blend, and we so appreciate you sharing your expertise and research with our audience and with the General Society tonight. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Now, just before we let you go, we would like to make a presentation to you, and to do so is our Executive Director, Victoria Dangle.
Thank you, Karen. And thank you, Cynthia. That was wonderful. As a native New Yorker, born and raised, I am so grateful to you for creating this book. I can't tell you how, every time I walk through that park, I think, what a gift we were given, and the foresight to create this in the middle of Manhattan, that it's a place for all, and that somehow, and from the bottom of my heart, all seems right with the world when you're walking through Central Park. And yes, I love it when Harry met Sally, it's true. So, Cynthia, on behalf of the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen of the City of New York, founded 1785, we express our gratitude to Central Park, the Central Park original designs for New York's greatest treasure, and indeed it is, to Cynthia S. Brenwall, conservator and art historian at the New York City Municipal Archives, for her participation in the General Society Artisan Lecture Series. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you for saying the names of the other creators of the park that don't get mentioned, because we should be thinking of them as well. So thank you for that. And because, as everyone knows who is a frequent attendee at our lectures, we never really let anyone go, so we've made you a lifetime member of the library.